Walt Disney's Disneyland.
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are.
Each week as you enter this timeless land, one of these many worlds will open to you. Frontierland, tall tales and true from the legendary past. Tomorrowland, promise of things to come. Adventureland, the wonder world of nature's own realm. Fantasyland, the happiest kingdom of them all. Presenting this week from Fantasyland, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Most of us are well acquainted with Ichabod Crane and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, a story which has entertained and delighted readers of all ages for a century and a half. But some of us may be less familiar with the man who created the Legend of Sleepy Hollow and whose literary genius brought him international recognition as America's first professional man of letters. So before presenting our version of Sleepy Hollow, we'd like to take just a few minutes to tell the story of the author, Washington Irving.
I was born in the city of New York, April the 3rd, 1783, the year the Revolutionary War ended. At that time, New York was a city of about 23,000 inhabitants, clustered about in a small area known as the Battery. Our house on William Street, between Fulton and John, was a quaint structure of yellow brick, its gable end and attic window facing the street.
Washington! Washington Irving! Oh, that boy never knows when to come home.
To the frequent alarm of my parents, I began my travels at an early age. I roamed about the streets of my native city, looking for new adventure. I explored new and fascinating places. Local events I always found interesting.
Say, looks like smoke. Must be a fire. Over on Broadway.
I often wandered down back streets and through strange neighborhoods, seeking out old abandoned houses which were said to be haunted. Many nights when I had stayed out too late, I would slip quietly into the house through my bedroom window. I wonder if I ever really fooled my mother. As I grew older, I extended my range of exploration to the surrounding countryside. Rambling through the fields and orchards of the old Dutch farms. Quite often, my wandering carried me to the neighboring villages. On these occasions, I added greatly to my store of knowledge by listening to tales of history and legend.
To surprise the British at Stony Point. So one night in the spring of 1780, we marched out of Fort Montgomery, 1,400 strong, headed inland to the south, round Bear Mountain and West Hill, over the Batched Underberg. And then just before midnight, the redcoats spotted us. All at once, there was a great shouting and a roaring of cannons, and we were on them like a pack of wildcats. And in half an hour, our bayonets had done their work. You should have seen them lobster backs hightail it for the Hudson.
One summer holiday, I explored the rustic region around Tarrytown. Not far from this village, hidden away in the hills, is a tiny valley, which is one of the quietest places in the whole world. This secluded glen has long been known by the name of Sleepy Hollow. The people of this neighborhood have always believed the place to be under a spell. They tell many wild stories of ghosts and haunted spots and twilight superstitions.
You know, son, some say the whole valley's under the spell of an old Indian chief. And others claim it's bewitched by an old Dutch doctor, one of the first settlers. His ghost comes riding through the woods on a blue pig every evening at twilight. His coattails are flapping and wearing a cocked hat. Fish feathers. You know, I've lived here all my life. I've seen him riding through here 1,000 times and never yet seen him wearing a cocked hat.
I very often neglected my regular school studies for more exciting reading. The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, Sinbad the Sailor, and a book on travel in foreign lands called The World Displayed. This continual reading of travels and voyages aroused in me a great desire to go to sea. In fine weather, I wandered about the pierheads and watched the tall ships sail out of the harbor, bound for distant lands. With longing eyes, I gazed after their lessening sails, carried away in my imagination to the ends of the earth.
Take care, Washington.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
The lure of distant places grew stronger within me. Finally, to silence my constant pleading to see more of the world, my parents sent me on a boat trip to Albany to visit two married sisters. What a delightful and enchanting experience was my first sail up the Hudson River. I sat on the deck gazing with wonder and admiration at the majestic cliffs crowned by forests, with eagles sailing and screaming around them. I shall never forget my first view of the Catskill Mountains, wild, woody, and rugged. I watched them through a long summer's day, ever changing, rising up, then melting away into hazy distance. With the coming of nightfall, we anchored at the foot of the mountains. Clouds drifting slowly across the moon cast weird shadow patterns on the water, their dark and mysterious designs having a witching effect on my boyish imagination. My first trip up the Hudson was one I shall long remember. At the age of 16, I took up the study of law, but I soon discovered that I was too much of a dreamer for the law profession. It was then I turned to writing. I began my career by contributing articles to my brother Peter's daily paper, the Morning Chronicle. Encouraged by the success of these efforts, I wrote my first book, A History of New York. For this, I used the name Dietrich Knickerbocker. My book was well received, but I was far from satisfied. I believed if I was to achieve any great success, I must see more of the world. Thus it was that in the spring of 1804, I sailed out of New York Harbor, bound for Europe. This trip was not merely for a change of scenery. Never need an American look beyond his own country for natural wonders. I found Europe rich in the accumulated treasure of ages. As I wandered through the great city of Rome, I marveled at the grandeur of her architecture, her monuments to heroic figures of history. The splendor of her ancient ruins told the story of centuries long past, the rise and fall of a mighty empire. And what a delight was my first trip to Paris. Here was a city dedicated to beauty and luxury, splendid palaces and magnificent parks. Here were masterpieces of art, the works of great craftsmen rendered with infinite care. Beauty was everywhere I looked, exquisite, delicate, lifelike in every detail. An evening at the Paris Opera often brought my day to a perfect ending. I had read so much about the city of London that it was like meeting an old acquaintance. London Bridge seemed quite familiar, and all the other famous places were just as I had pictured them. St. Paul's Cathedral, massive and aloof above the waters of the Thames. Westminster Abbey, dignified and solemn, brooding over the traditions of its honored dead. The Tower of London, stern old fortress built by William the Conqueror in the 11th century. Within its ancient halls, the relics of medieval times told of heroic struggles, of great deeds, and of tragedy. While in London, it was my good fortune to meet some of the great writers of the time, poets, historians, and novelists, men of achievement, Thomas Moore, Lord Byron, Sir Walter Scott.
Congratulations, Dietrich Knickerbocker, on your history of New York.
Well, thank you, sir. Very kind of you.
Yeah, delightful book. Rich bit of satire. Let's read it again.
What was the bit about naming the island Manhattan?
Oh, yes. The Indian squaws wore men's hats, so they called it Manhattan.
A toast, gentlemen, to Washington Irving, first great author of America.
Encouraged by this high praise, Washington Irving journeyed to Stratford-on-Avon, ready to write seriously. In this quaint little town, home of the immortal Shakespeare, Irving, too, found inspiration. And in a room at the Red Horse Inn, he wrote his world-famous sketchbook. This was a collection of stories telling of his travels, his sailing trip to Europe, accounts of the great places he'd seen, views of the old world customs and traditions. But of all these stories, two alone were responsible for the success of the book. Stories which were inspired by his own Hudson River country, Rip Van Winkle and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Having achieved through his sketchbook a prominent place among the world's great literary figures, Washington Irving spent the next 30 years of his life traveling and writing about the countries that he visited. At the age of 63, he returned to his beloved home in the Hudson River Valley, where he spent the latter years of his life writing a history of the great American for whom he was named, George Washington. Although he had hoped that this history of Washington would serve as his monument, it is for Rip Van Winkle and the legend of Sleepy Hollow that Washington Irving is best remembered.
Now, we're going to retell the legend of Sleepy Hollow through the voice of a man who is something of an American legend himself, Bing Crosby.
If we could but journey back to that remote period in American history when the city of Manhattan was but a market town, we would discover in the bosom of one of those spacious coves which indent the shores of the Hudson, the little village of Tarrytown. And just beyond, nestled deep in the low, rolling hills, a sequestered glen. It's a quiet, peaceful place, and yet somehow foreboding. But of course, the good Dutch settlers refused to believe such nonsense, for they knew the schoolmaster had been spirited away by the headless horseman.
Man, I'm getting out of here.
Man, I'm getting out of here, too.